The invitation felt like a joke at first, a cruel one. Amelia had never set foot in a gala before, let alone one hosted at the Astoria Grand, a palace of mirrors and marble where people didn't just wear gowns, they wore bloodlines. She almost didn't go. But the ticket came with her name printed in gold, sent anonymously, no note attached. Curiosity overpowered fear. She rented a dress, off-rack, one size too large, and did her own makeup with trembling hands. As she stepped into the ballroom that night, heads turned, not in admiration, but in confusion. Whispers floated through crystal chandeliers like smoke. Is she with catering? Someone murmured. Who invited her? Another snickered. Amelia felt their eyes slicing through her confidence. The other women sparkled in designer gowns, draped in silk and diamonds, walking like they owned the air. Amelia held her breath and tried to shrink. But even shrinking couldn't protect her from what came next. A woman in a sapphire dress, cocktail in hand, smiled with venom and said, "Darling, the charity auction's in the other wing, unless—" "You're here to be bid on," laughter followed. Her cheeks burned, her hands clenched. She turned to leave, heart thudding, when a voice behind her interrupted everything. "She's with me," it said, calm, commanding, and when she turned around, the room went still. Because standing there wasn't just anyone, it was him. The billionaire no one ever expected to speak. Let alone to her. Nathaniel Wexley wasn't just rich. He was the kind of rich people whispered about behind closed doors. He owned entire tech empires, art collections that never touched the public eye, and real estate in cities he hadn't visited in years. But most of all, he owned the room without needing to announce it. He rarely attended events like this, and when he did, he never brought dates. So when he stepped beside Amelia, placing one hand lightly on her lower back with elegant familiarity, the ballroom's golden glow seemed to flicker with collective disbelief. "You look incredible," he told her, eyes locked on hers like no one else existed. Amelia didn't understand. She had never met him, not once. And yet, he acted as if they had a shared history, as if she belonged there beside him. The woman in sapphire went silent. Her smile collapsed into something tighter, smaller. And as Nathaniel guided Amelia toward the main hall, conversations resumed, louder now, more forced, like a mask hastily reapplied. Amelia walked stiffly at first, then softer. He whispered little things in her ear about the art, the wine, the absurdity of people pretending to be important. She laughed, genuinely. For a moment, she forgot the whispers, forgot the humiliation. Because here she was, not invisible, not mocked, but chosen. And the man choosing her didn't do anything accidentally. Still, one question pulsed beneath it all. Why her? Why tonight? Why now? As the evening unfolded, Amelia felt like she had stepped into a life that wasn't hers, or at least not one she ever imagined could be. Nathaniel didn't introduce her as anything less than an equal. He guided her through conversations with CEOs, designers, politicians, never once explaining her presence, never letting her fade into the background. The same guests who had mocked her earlier now smiled too wide, asked too many questions, and pretended they hadn't just laughed in her face. Amelia, for her part, struggled to relax. Part of her wanted to flee, to believe this was a cruel setup. But another part, the part that had endured years of being overlooked, passed over, ridiculed, wanted to stay, wanted to stand tall. So she did. She answered questions with honesty, let herself exist without apology, and drank sparkling water with the grace of someone learning their worth in real time. Every so often, Nathaniel would lean close and say something that made her laugh, not for show, but because she wanted to. And when the live orchestra began to play, he extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said. She hesitated. "I'm not good at this," he smiled. "Neither am I," and they danced. Not perfectly, but freely. She in her borrowed dress, he in his effortless charm. And as the chandeliers reflected their movement, Emilia didn't realize something crucial. She wasn't being transformed into someone new. She was finally being seen for who she'd always been. The next morning, the gala was already trending online. Photos of Emilia and Nathaniel dancing, laughing, walking side by side had flooded every fashion and gossip blog. Her name wasn't even mentioned in most headlines. They called her the mystery woman, the unknown guest, the girl who stole the billionaire's attention. Comments were vicious. People speculated she was a gold digger, an escort, someone who had played her cards right. Emilia sat in her tiny apartment, still in the dress from the night before, scrolling in disbelief. She should have felt broken. But strangely, she didn't. The ridicule felt familiar. What felt unfamiliar was the warmth she still carried from. The way Nathaniel had looked at her, not like she was lucky to be there, but like he was. She didn't have his number, didn't expect to hear from him again. Maybe it was just a moment, a performance. But that thought broke something inside her, not because she wanted his money or his world, but because last night, for the first time in years, someone had made her feel chosen, not pitied, not tolerated, chosen, just as she closed her laptop and prepared to put the dress away for good. A soft knock came at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, there stood a man in a sleek black uniform, holding a small envelope with her name handwritten across it. No return address, no logo. Just one sentence inside, "I'd like to see you again." And Emilia stared at the note like it might disappear if she blinked too fast. It didn't say where or when, just that he wanted to see her. And somehow, that was enough. She kept the envelope on her kitchen counter all day, as if it anchored her to something too surreal to grasp. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the city skyline, a black car pulled up outside her building. No horn, no message, just presence. She hesitated for a long second before stepping inside. The driver didn't ask questions. He simply said, "He's waiting for you." The car glided through streets Emilia had never driven, past districts with names she'd only seen in headlines. When they arrived, it wasn't at a mansion or a skyscraper. It was a quiet rooftop garden above a bookstore, lit only by string lights and the last light of the day. Nathaniel stood near the edge, sleeves rolled, drink in hand, no security in sight. He turned and smiled like he had been waiting hours, not minutes. "You came," he said. Emilia crossed her arms, cautious, but curious. "Why me?" she asked. He didn't miss a beat. "Because you weren't looking at anyone else. You weren't performing. And you stayed, even when they laughed." He handed her a cup of tea, not champagne. "I've seen too many people try to be impressive. You just were." She sipped, silent. The world below them blurred into noise, and for once, it didn't matter. They talked for hours on that rooftop, far from chandeliers and judging eyes. Nathaniel shared pieces of himself Emilia never expected, not boardroom wins or magazine covers, but quiet things. His love for sketching architecture, the sister he lost to illness, the way loneliness can echo in penthouses just as loudly as in empty apartments. Emilia listened, not out of awe, but because she genuinely wanted to know him, not the name, but the man behind it. When the night grew colder, he offered her his coat again, just as he had at the gala. But this time, she didn't feel like someone being rescued. She felt like someone being respected. He didn't try to kiss her, didn't ask to see her again. He just said, "Thank you for not pretending with me." And she replied, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." As she rode home, That night, the city looked different. Not brighter, not softer, just more real. She wasn't thinking about love or headlines or fairy tales. She was thinking about how one moment of kindness, one person choosing not to look away, can change the way you see yourself. Amelia didn't know if this was the start of something or just a beautiful pause. But for once, she didn't feel small. She felt possible, and that feeling, so long forgotten, was worth more than any ballroom approval. Nathaniel didn't give her a new story. He reminded her she'd always had one. In the days that followed, Amelia went back to her routine, working at the museum front desk, riding the subway, eating alone, sketching strangers in her notebook. But something inside her had shifted. She stood taller, spoke slower, looked people in the eye, not because she was different, but because she had stopped apologizing for being exactly as she was. The memory of the gala had faded from social media, replaced by newer gossip and shinier scandals. But Nathaniel didn't fade. He sent books to her work, novels he loved, wrapped in craft paper with quiet notes inside. Page 73. That part reminded me of your stubbornness. He never signed them. He never showed up uninvited. He just existed in her world like a thread, not pulling, just connecting. One evening, she found a package at her door. Inside was a painting, one of her own. A sketch she had left in a cafe weeks ago of herself seated among faceless figures. Except now, someone had painted it in vivid color. Every line sharpened, every detail honored. At the bottom corner, in Nathaniel's handwriting, "You were never invisible." Amelia held the canvas in her hands and cried. Not because she was sad, because for the first time, someone had reflected her back with honesty. Not perfection, not fantasy, just presence. And that was the rarest kind of attention. The kind that says, "I don't want to fix you. I just want to witness who you already are." A few weeks later, Amelia received an invitation. Not handwritten, not anonymous. It was official, sealed in deep green, embossed with gold. The Sterling Foundation Gala, Benefactor's Table. She blinked twice. The event was far more prestigious than the one before, reserved for a different tier of guests, people who didn't just attend galas, they funded them. Amelia felt her stomach twist. Last time, she was mocked, laughed at, underdressed, uninvited. This time, she wasn't sure what to expect. She didn't reach out to Nathaniel. Part of her wanted to believe this invitation came from someone else, from somewhere she'd earned, not been pulled into. But deep down, she knew. The night of the gala, she wore a gown loaned from a local boutique, elegant, understated navy blue. She did her makeup calmly, no shaking hands. When she entered the venue, she didn't look for Nathaniel. She walked like she belonged, and that alone changed everything. Eyes followed her again, but this time not with confusion, with curiosity, with pause. The same women who had laughed months ago now smiled with polite restraint. Some remembered her. Most had tried to forget. But you can't forget someone who rises after being publicly dismissed. When she reached her table, a glass of champagne already waited for her. Beside it, a folded card that simply read, "Seat reserved. No introductions needed." She smiled. Not because of who was watching, but because for once, she didn't care who was. Midway through the evening, Nathaniel appeared, not grandly, not with fanfare, just with presence. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, slightly tousled hair. Like he'd walked in from a meeting he didn't care to finish. He greeted no one else first. He walked straight to her table, leaned slightly, and whispered, "I almost didn't come. But I wanted to see how you'd glow without me standing beside you." Amelia looked up, surprised, a small smile forming. "And?" she asked. He took a sip of her untouched champagne, returned it gently, and said, "You didn't need me. But I'm glad I'm here anyway." The orchestra swelled. People took notice. Whispers began again, but this time she didn't flinch. Nathaniel extended his hand, just like before. She stood, but not as the unknown girl this time. She stood as someone seen. They danced, slowly. The lights glinted off her earrings. The music blurred around them. And yet, it wasn't a fairy tale. There was no glass slipper. No dramatic kiss. Just two people who had found peace in a world addicted to pretending. Around them, eyes still watched. But inside her, a stillness had replaced the storm. This wasn't about being chosen anymore. This was about choosing back. And as they danced, Amelia realized the most powerful moment of the night wasn't being on his arm. It was knowing she could have stood there alone and still belonged. That was what made all the difference. Months later, Amelia stood before a group of students in an art outreach program, holding the same painting Nathaniel had returned to her, the one she thought she'd lost. She spoke about visibility, not fame. About how there's a difference between being looked at and being seen. She didn't mention the gala, or the gossip, or the billionaire. This wasn't about him. It never truly was. Afterward, as the students filtered out, Nathaniel appeared at the back of the room, hands in his pockets, eyes quiet with pride. He waited until the last student left before approaching. "You were brilliant," he said. "They listened to you like you were someone." Amelia turned to face him fully. "That's because I am." She wasn't being arrogant. She was being honest. The kind of honesty that comes after years of shrinking, doubting, apologizing for taking up space. He reached for her hand, not to pull her in, but to ask for presence. And she gave it freely. They didn't talk about what came. Next, no grand plans. No fairy tale promises. Just a shared understanding that real connection doesn't demand an audience. As they stepped outside into the evening light, the city unfolded before them, familiar and vast. The same streets where she once felt invisible now felt open. Not because she was on someone's arm, but because she had finally learned to walk in her own light. And next to her was a man who never needed to outshine it, only reflect it back. Later that week, a well-known fashion magazine published a headline that read, "From Nobody to Muse, the woman who captivated Nathaniel Wexley." The article was full of inaccuracies, speculations about their relationship, assumptions about her past, and empty quotes from people who once ignored her. Amelia skimmed through it and closed the tab. It didn't make her angry. It didn't make her proud either. It just felt irrelevant. Because she finally understood something. When people label you, it says more about their limits than your identity. She didn't need their headlines. Her story wasn't a scandal or a Cinderella tale. It was hers, full of awkward pauses, small wins, quiet bravery. Nathaniel, for all his wealth and mystery, never tried to define her. He showed up. He listened. He witnessed. And in a world full of noise, that was a revolution in itself. That night, Amelia sat on her fire escape with a cup of tea and a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She opened her sketchbook, not for commissions or clients, but for herself. She drew the ballroom, the rooftop, the painting he returned to her. Then she turned the page, took a deep breath, and began sketching something new. No more blurred outlines. No more missing features. Just clarity, intention, truth. Because she wasn't drawing from longing anymore. She was drawing from recognition. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting to be seen. She had already looked in the mirror and finally, fully, seen herself. Weeks passed, then months. Amelia and Nathaniel didn't flood the world with their story. There were no red carpets, no joint interviews, No staged photographs. They went on quiet walks, shared books, cooked together, laughed in grocery aisles. The kind of life people rarely write about, not because it isn't worth telling, but because it's harder to sensationalize something so real. Occasionally, someone would recognize her, whisper, point, post. But she no longer shrank under attention. She didn't live in the shadow of his status, nor did she try to step into his spotlight. They had created a third space, one where she didn't have to be extraordinary to be valuable. One rainy afternoon, they visited the same gallery where Amelia once dreamed of having her work featured. At the far end of the exhibit, beneath warm lighting, a single canvas hung in silence, her painting. Not because of a favor, not because of his money, but because her work had finally been recognized on its own merit. Nathaniel didn't say anything. He simply looked at the painting, then at her, with the quiet awe of someone who knows exactly what he's witnessing. Amelia slipped her hand into his and whispered, "They laughed at me once." He nodded. "Now they look up to you." She smiled. "Let them. I'm not here for their approval anymore." And as they stood there together, not as a billionaire and a girl from nowhere, but as equals, the room finally felt quiet enough to hear her story.